Well, I want to welcome everybody. Thank the pastor for having us here. It's nice to cooperate with St. Patrick's on this whole venture. I think this really is the place to be. People from all over. I see people arriving from Long Island, New York, and from Connecticut. We even got people here from Oxford, England. Where's Oxford? Yes. Our speaker for next week is here, Father Edward Yarnold, international scholar. So it's obviously the right place to be. Even from Sandusky, Ohio, I see my friend. Nice to have this. We got a wonderful series for you. I think after this, we got a fine lineup. 9 speakers coming up after this. We have heavy hitters in this line. It seems appropriate to have a baseball metaphor, I think. Heavy hitters like Richard McCormick and Ken Untner. And we have some of our local heavy hitters. I see one in the back, Father Robert Wilhelm, somewhat known in this parish. We even have people who are in a league of their own coming up. Pat Schnapp and Shannon Shrine, among others. League of their own. Rodney said, take it out on the road first to see if these things work. Anyway, nice to have all of you here. Want to talk about the Catechism. I'm sort of shaping it this way. Let's suppose we're out in a ship, we get shipwrecked, and we get off and find ourselves on an island, and all we've got is our briefcase with us, and we had a number of books in there. Some of them still out. There's one book left. So we have to ask ourselves, what one book would we want? Do you remember Chesterton's line? One book he wanted? Practical Guide to Shipbuilding. However, we do not have this book. We have this book with us, Catechism of the Catholic Church. And we got a long time on this island, and so while we're there, we're going to do some soul searching. And we're going to try to figure out who we are and what we're all about, and what kind of people we want to be. So we got time to think about those serious questions of self-awareness, trying to get in touch with who we are and what we're becoming as a person and collectively. Who are we and who are we becoming and who should we be? So we have decided to spend our time on this island with most serious kinds of questions to deal with. And we find ourselves with this book. Now, when we begin to open this book there to see what is happening, there are some people on this island who, when they get it, are going to build a fire and burn it. I mean, there's people not here tonight because they're boycotting this. It's true. There's people who would like to be here and are interested in it, but they're boycotting it on purpose because when they opened the book to see about what they could learn about themselves, all they're finding is talk about man and men. And this upsets them because they feel excluded from this. No, it's serious. I mean, I'm not kidding. In our group, there's groups that have vowed not to read it, not to sell it, not to speak about it, and so on, because they're upset about the language. I think it'd be nice for those people to know that the bishops of the United States tried mightily to get that straightened out, led by Cardinal Law. They tried mightily with the Vatican over a long period of time to get the language changed. It's a sign of our times that the American bishops generally joined together on that, and were not able to accomplish it. It's a very sign of the times of how national churches relate to the Vatican and so on. So it's something that somebody might notice right away in looking at the Catechism. The other thing that people pick up and say, aha, I want to find out who I am. So where would I look? I'd look under human beings. Or in this case, forced to look under man. I look for a section on human beings. Well, what one would find is that there isn't one concentrated part I'm going to look at and find what I'd call an anthropology. Just one section that would tell us what our as a whole religion tells about being human. What I find is that material is scattered throughout the Catechism. And that thing we will find in other places as well, in other texts. Someone who wants to read God, for example, read the section on God, and then find out that in the section it doesn't have anything to say about the problem of atheism. They have to find another part of it. And that all results from the way the book is structured. You all have a handout here. The handout is devoted to bring for us the various notes of the Catechism. I ask you, how many people have the Catechism? Wow. Fantastic. That's amazing, isn't it? I can't try with any other book. How many people have First Foundation Christian Faith? Well, this is to the Catechism. That's amazing. Oh, I could have read it, Anyway, people know in the handout I have is to guide us, and the reason you're not to find a section on anthropology or understanding of human existence is because not the way the book structured. The book structured like Catechism of the Gospel of Christ structure, exactly the same pattern. And in number 2, when you're at the outline, see that pattern is the plan Catechism by the great sins of Catechism, by Catechism, 4 pillars. It's built on the 12 articles of the Creed, 7 sacraments, 10 commandments, and the petitions of the prayer. How the book is structured. And I, in those sections, find bits and pieces on what it means to be a human being and not have it collected in place. People recognize that there's an alternative way of writing a catechism or structuring our thought. Alternative way would be, example, to say, well, talk about who we are, and then we talk about who God is. And then we talk about grace, and then revelation, and Christ, and morality, and energy, and then eschatology are the final. That's another way of structuring the way we understand what it means to be Christian and what our faith is about. Now, the next thing we're going to note in all of this, that's the Catechism. When it came out, that's following the way they did it at the Council of Trent, which was the response to the Protestant Reformation. The purpose of the Catechism is to give us a synthesis of the faith. And then there's the whole question of adaptation. But the Catechism makes it very clear it is not designed to meet the needs of every group. No, like we're sitting here, this Catechism is used in India, or Africa, or China, in very different circumstances. So there is absolutely no effort to adapt it to where people are at. You end up on that island and up the book, probably going to look a lot different if you happen to be Chinese or if you happen to be middle-class American. Because there's no effort to adapt it. First thing you're going to see is you're going to have to do a lot of thinking on this island. You're going to have to figure out those broad points are new to you given your particular situation, your life, and so on. And then we have the whole idea of spirituality. The purpose of the Catechism is somehow to make better people, help us to be better lovers, so on. The next thing about the Catechism is that it is not co-relational. Just that any effort to present this co-relation, we try to take the situation we find ourselves, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what we're wrestling with, and to see how doctrines or dogmas correlate with it. When we hear good preaching, it somehow feels that way to us. It says, oh, what they're telling me there, pulpit, is answer some question lurking in heart. That's what it means to be co-relational, to match the doctrine, the teaching of the church, to some existential concern and question that's in mind and heart. The Catechism makes no effort to that at all. In that sense, it follows the method of one of the giant 20th century, that is Hans von Balthasar, and totally rejecting the method of my own teacher, Rahner. Balthasar's idea was take the faith and make it beautiful, and emphasize it, make it integrated, and lay it out there. People either take it or reject it. They'll take it because it looks beautiful to them, because it seems to be truthful and lead one to truth. Rauner's idea is exactly the opposite of that we must always try to figure out how to say the doctrines in a way that fits people's mentality, categories of people. This catechism makes absolutely no effort to do that. So sitting on the island, you have to remember that. That's something you have to do for yourself. And the catechism recognizes that. And it tells we must do the adapt, we must do the apply. We who are sure got to figure out how to make correlations. And the other thing we'll see is that you read, there's all kinds of quotes in here. Thousands of quotes from great theologians. None of them in the 20th century. You know, the last major thinker that is quoted as near as I figure, and Father Hill can correct me, that is Newman, I believe, would be the last major thinker in the 18th century, you know, that's quoted here. So even the darling Cardinal Ratzinger, who was the main architect of this and takes his commission, that is on George von Balthasar, not even is quoted in here. So you can't expect the Catechism to give you a 20th century kind of feel for the Catholic faith. It quotes Augustine and Aquinas and Irenaeus and Bonaventure. It quotes the Council of Trent and Roman Catechism. It does not do any quoting of 20th century theologians or century use of their ideas. So, we got to remember that when sitting on our island and trying to figure out how this book is help us. And yet, I believe the book can be extremely valuable answering that question, who am I and who am I become? What do I want to be? And who are we becoming, and who do we want to be? The book has great help on it. I could take a representative figure from, I suppose, the liberal wing. The Archbishop Weekly told me himself that he considers the Catechism on balance to be a great resource. He says he wishes they had edited once more, and each time they did it, there was a lot of movement, but on balance, Bishop Weekland, you got a valuable source here. Now, it's something for those who are not happy with it, because they might think maybe to think about. Now, with that introductory material, I want to move in kind of substantive answer the question, and what are we going to find out about ourselves while we're sitting on that island reflecting this one book? What we're going to learn. And of course, my own method to be correlation. Got to put it together. So the first thing is that I remember when I'm on that island, I have cultural messages playing in my head. I've got tapes from the secular world that we're in, from the media, television, movies, growing up in the United States that are playing in my head. I can avoid that. And one of the messages is secularism. It's in this context, I mean fundamentally that the world is self-sufficient, that it holds on its own. Let me just try to put that maybe in more graphic form. So I have an example of a cradle Catholic. Grew up all of his life Catholic and moved ahead in the socioeconomic world, went to university, got a degree, got a good job, moved up, has a house with a swimming pool and a boat and a couple of cars and so on. And somewhere in midlife he says, well, what is this? Is this all there is? I mean, these toys do not bring me happiness. All of this stuff that I have doesn't seem to satisfy the longings of my heart. Everything in the culture says that I'm made it. Everything says I should be a happy person. I got everything that they tell you on television you ought to have to be happy. And I got it and I'm not. Be sort of a secularist mentality, orientation that has taken over this man. The other thing you have to remember in culture is calling it the trivialization of religion. The idea is that religion is so nice for old people right before they're going to die. You know, or it's a nice thing to go to church together on Christmas or Easter, but it has no essential relevance to people who are with it. Make a different world is hope. Your shakers and movers are the people who well in the business world. Nothing to do with that. It's a nice side life. It's nice. That's probably the word you could use. It's a nice thing. It's nice priest at Toledo come and say prayer at situation. I'd like to have him do that tonight. Well, but as far as what he represents, having anything to do with the actual life of the university, no. It's sort of the trivialization of religion. Now, the Catechism disputes that. It's cultural. In fact, you see in almost every way, the Catechism is countercultural. Because what it essentially says is that we are religious creatures. Religion isn't some peripheral thing that you might have for a while or use before you die, but it's of the very essence of what we are. That there's a human drive for mystery, for the God, the natural desire of God, as Thomas Aquinas put it. It's written into our hearts. Now, I'm not going to all these quotes as we do, but what you're able to, what I do is pick out elements in the Catechism that speak to the question. Just can look at one here. The desire for written in the human heart, the Catechism says. Why? Because we human beings created by God for God. God never ceases to draw us to herself. Only in God will we find true happiness. So there is a other sense of things. This is not a peripheral matter. This is the only way to find happiness through this religious quest. It claims that all cultures have seen this, even in secularized culture. There's people around who know this. This man, middle age, who says, well, what's all this? Toys don't make me happy. Well, this man is into a religious perception. He's open to the mystery dimension of life. He's joining all kind of other people to understand the only way to satisfy the human heart is simply in relationship to God. The Catechism is wonderful quote from the great fathers, the saints, and so on. In number 3, you see a classic quote that comes at the beginning of the confession. I mean, it's a great resource. You can find those quotes rather easily. And the one is so familiar to us. Lord, you see the very last line, you yourself entreat us to delight in your praise. For you made us for yourself, and our heart is restless till it rests in you. Now that's great. I mean, in a classic statement, restless heart. It's a classic statement that we are a religious creature, and that there's no satisfaction, urges, finally, just in material things. It's a striking at the consumerism in the culture, as by having, we will feel satisfied. Odd thing, the more real things we have, perhaps the less satisfied people in our culture, because we have this vague anxiety, this vague disquiet that people have trouble even hold of or understanding. A heart restless, no matter, always restless, to rest in God. So, we're sitting on the island and trying to make sense of our lives about our catechism, and we're reading through here, number 30, say we could spend a week just thinking about that one sentence out of Augustine, one general idea that we are religious creatures. My own mentor, Carl Hunter, says that in different ways. He says, in a more contemporary framework, we have a question to whom there is answer. Walk this earth, we have a question. It's not, we got a lot of questions. It's not it. Yeah, questions. That's not the point. Right? We are a question. It's our being is to quest knowledge, to quest love, to quest for deeper experience, to thirst that and hunger. We are a quest described in our gut, and that's why we can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of it by toys. It just doesn't. So the Catechism is cultural in this regard. Let's take up the next one here. While I'm there, pond the great questions by island. One of the important things to me is, am I alone in this universe or not? Is this a hostile world or not? A smart man to Yale study. Goes to Yale as a good Catholic. And he's sitting there, he encounters same kind of thinking you come to know as the deconstructionist. His great home in the United States is Yale University. People like Jacques Derrida. These people teach is actually that there's no way to find universal truth in life. That the human mind is incapable of finding structure and reality that are universally true, that are necessarily so. Richard Rorty, probably our best-known American philosopher, writes at great length about the fact that the human mind cannot equate reality, cannot come up with a correspondence between what's mind and the real world. That's not possible, people say. What they say is take a text like the Bible. Nobody can find one definite meaning for it we could all accept. There isn't any one definite meaning in any text, whether it's Shakespeare or the Bible or anything else, say the deconstruction. Whatever classic text you're reading, whatever you want it to be, whatever your experience makes it mean to you, you can't uncover any deeper reality. As one of deconstructionists, Francois Lyotard, said, there are no mega-narratives. There are no overarching stories. There are no universal truths. There are no absolute values that really compel us to follow them, accept them, and from them. So this guy's at Yale University, and he comes out there and agnostic religiously. He lost faith while he's studying at Yale University, and he's walking around in our community now, unsure of any metaphysical truth, unsure of any absolute. This is an unhappy position to be in. But he found no way out of it. Well, we're sitting on our island and happen to have gone to Yale or participated somehow in this dialogue. You might come at this way. One isn't into deconstructing them. There's the great limitations of language. Wait a second, I'm thinking all these things about God, but I'm thinking God's my Father. Right, God's my Father. But geez, I mean, he's not male. God's not male. He doesn't have a son, way a father, I'm a son. What does this mean that God is a father? What? I mean, I don't know. What is the language is too limited. God, I say God's a father. I'm saying, God, my Father, help me get off this island. But I don't know who I'm praying to. It doesn't seem to make any sense. Even the word I use, I can immediately see it's not adequate. That might be a way into this particular point. Now, the Catechism is super sure on this question. I mean, the Catechism demonstrates no doubt, doesn't even have a hint of doubt on this whole question. There's no doubt. We know God. We can know God by our reason. We can know God by looking at the world. We can know God exists by looking at the world. You can see there's rocks, and then there's plants, and then there's kangaroos, and then there's people, and there's probably angels. And you go right up the line, and sure enough, at the top of all of that is the Supreme Being, God. My reason can tell me that there must be a Supreme Being if you're going from rocks to animals to people to angels. You can figure that out by looking at the world. The Catechism has no doubt about that reason can assure us of this kind of faith. I think we got some quotes here that maybe suggest all of this. Yes, number one under the Catechism, creating God's image, we got sort of called proof. Not in a scientific sense of 2 plus 2 is 4, or weighing something, looking at it in a microscope, but rather in a sense of converging and convincing arguments. I think we get an echo of Cardinal Newman here. Cardinal Newman says we end up, our faith is based on converging probabilities. Many things coming together that tell us, yeah, there is a God. So the Catechism tells us that we know this because the world reveals God to us. Then we got the marvelous quote from Augustine, all the beauty in the world. It almost sounds like St. Francis too, doesn't it? Everything is beautiful. Air, the sky, the whole created world is beautiful, and that suggests to me that there's a source of this beauty, the beautiful one, the one we call God. The other way we know it, the Catechism says, we know there's a God by reason now. We're not reading our Bible to find this out. We're just thinking about it on the island. We don't have a Bible with us. We're just thinking about it. The other way is by knowing ourselves. when we look deep within, we look at all these things the Catechism talks about, our drive for truth, our wanting to know more, our conscience that says, don't do this, do that, comes to us as a command, our desire for happiness, our freedom, our thirst to be free, all those things when we look at ourselves, the answer comes out that there has to be a God that's behind all of that. All of this has its origins only in God. So the Catechism is extremely positive on us using our heads to be able to figure out about this question, does God exist or not? Is this universe hospitable or not? I like that way of formulating the question, incidentally. I've repeated a couple of times. Is this world hospitable? Do we belong here? Can we be comfortable here? Are we in gracious hands or not? The answer, of course, Catechism is clearly, our reason says yes. Now we get a little caveat here, a little bit of saying, but sitting on this island by yourself, if you haven't had too much education and aren't too philosophically trained, your mind could begin to play tricks on you. And you could say, I might be all alone here. I might be praying and no one's listening. That's possible. See, now begin my own weakness, my own limitations come into play. Now it's helpful to have this book because there's quotes in here from a book we call the Bible. A lot of quotes. The book divided them in two parts, through Scripture and the Scripture. And the book is premised on the fact that there is a God revealed herself in history, the exodus of the Israelites through Jesus of Nazareth. That's the kind of God we believe in. This God is active in the world. So that the Catechism says, while we are weak and our reason could take us off track, revelation from God keeps us on track, helps us to know, yeah, your first thought was the right thought. There indeed this God. We'll recognize in number 4 and statements of actual Aquinas. Yeah, we can know these by human reason, but in this nation in which we can fool ourselves and rationalize, these things known by all people, revelation, so we can easily and with certainty and with no admixture of error. Now, to the language question. It's interesting. Let's look at the quote on the lead question. It's number 5. To get an admission of what many philosophers of the 20th century reminded us. That is the limitation of language in talk about God. Ludwig Wittgenstein and people like that. People, many of the philosophers at Oxford University think these ways, language analysis. So the Catechism says, look, it's true, our language is weak. It can't capture the reality of God. We have to realize that when I say God is Father, more unlike life what God is like. Between Creator and creature, similitude can be expressed without applying an even greater dissimilitude. Here we get a key idea in the Catechism about how religious language functions. It's analogical. It's more unlike God than like God. If you say God is a father, it doesn't mean God is no. It doesn't mean God is children. It's indicating something we think is true about God's care for us, like we're dependent upon God, and so on. Very important statements in the Catechism about language. It's limited in our ability to express. And then the next part is a quote from Aquinas. Concerning God, you cannot grasp who he is, but only what he is not, and how we stand in relationship. Its Aquinas to this statement is that the important thing we can know about God is that we don't know God. That's the most important thing to know. That's not a throwaway statement in Aquinas. That's the thing. You know, there's a statement in Aquinas cited by my own teacher, Honor, that says even heaven God remains incomprehensible. That's what from Thomas Aquinas. In heaven, God remains incomprehensible. That's to highlight the mysterious character of God. So the first thing that Catechism is helping us say in all, we're sitting there pondering God. If I got questions out and it seems a little vague, then it's a better shot that I'm on track than I think if I got it all figured out. I'm not saying they intended that, but that's what will come out from reading this kind of statement from Aquinas. Most important thing is to know we don't know God. The people walking around who think they got God figured out or know how God acts are the ones who have missed the boat. God's ways are not our ways. When a guy who worked for 1 hour at the end got paid the same as people who worked all day. It's a strange kind of God that Jesus talks about. Very unfair God here. Now, just as with all these things, I want to say something about contemporary thinkers in reading this. This person on the island once took a course on contemporary theologians. One of the theologians that she studied was Hans Kung. And Hans wrote a book called Does That God Exist? And she doesn't remember everything in the book, but she remembers one thing that Kung said. It is that proof, no proof, clearly, finally proves God exists. In words among contemporaries, there's a sort of agnostic sense of this. Ooh, this thing is not so simple. This thing of going from rocks to plants to kangaroos to people, angels, and therefore there's God. Some philosophers say that's an illegitimate jump. You can't make that jump. And people like Hans Kung end up agreeing with that. One has to be careful of saying, I'm going to walk up to my son who has quit the church and says he's an atheist now and prove to him that God exists. Hans says you probably can't do it. And for very good, not just because he's bullheaded, but because that's the very nature of the question in dealing with God. Now, to go on, what else? So, while we're sitting there, the Catechism tells me I'm on an island by myself, but I'm in a hospitable universe. And when I cry out for help, out of the depths I cry to thee, O Lord, quoting Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to thee, O Lord, there is someone who hears that, and someone who holds us in gracious arms. Well, the third thing that we want to look at here has to do with human dignity. And here, the cultural aspect of this is subtle, I think. In the Western world, we largely accept the dignity of human beings. I mean, even our most secularized people will affirm, no, humans are important. Humans are supremely important. Humans have dignity. Human worth, you must treat them with respect. Human rights are essential. The most advanced thinkers in the country think that. Richard Rorty thinks that. Jacques Derrida thinks that. The deconstructionists that people have dignity in earth. Everyone agrees to that. It's sort of an agreed principle. In the modern Western world, when it's violated, they don't like it. When women get raped, they say that's wrong. What happens in India, the United States? This violation of human dignity. But what has changed in the modern world is the warrant for that, the basis for it. I get this, the Canadian Catholic pastor Charles Davis had his book mentioned there. Sources of the Supplement book, large volume, very influential and important Catholic philosopher. What he says the difference is some people walk in the culture that got a reason for why people have dignity. What is law in the United States today is the basis for it. Why do people have dignity? Why should we treat them with respect? Why ought people not be violated? What is the principle behind it? There's an awful lot of people in the United States that have no answer to that. I'm sure Richard Rorty has an answer to that since there are no absolute truths. There are no absolute values. What's grounded on? It's a part of our public life in the United States today. And to go on, I mean, the simple place it comes out is on the abortion question. How do you end up grounding the idea, giving a base for the idea that the unborn is worthy of respect? That's one of the reasons we can't get agreement on the question, largely. Even frame the question in this culture. And of course, the Catechism hangs away here. The Catechism says, of course, there are warrants for human dignity. Of course, basis for it is a grounding of it. And it's at least 4 reasons why human beings have dignity. At least there's one section of the Catechism that puts it that way. And the first reason is that we're made in the image and likeness of God. One quote from St. Cassiana. See it there? Typical of a great resource of why you want this yourself, I suppose. What made you establish us in state of dignity? Certainly the incalculable love by which you look on your creature now. You're looking with love for her. For by love indeed you created, by love you have given her incapable of tasting your eternal good. Catherine of Siena, wonderful quote with a lot of sentiment, a lot of feeling, a lot of intensity of we're made in the image of God, made out of love. That's why we ought to respect one another. We ought to respect one another because we are fascinated. Combination of spirit and matter. Fascinating combination, which makes the people of infinite longing and finite capabilities. Sitting on our island, we would like to be able to fly back to the home that we left. Our hearts soar that, our imagination envision us back there. But our bodies ground us on the island and won't let us move. Well, the Catechism, I think, in really good kind of quote here, tells us that our dignity is rooted as much in our body as in our soul. Look at the very end of it. Well, for this reason, a person must not despise their bodily life. Why? Because our perfection is given to us by God created matter as much as spirit. Rather, we are obliged to regard our bodies as good and to hold them in honor since God has created them and will raise them up on the last day. So we've got to treat each other with dignity and respect, not because just because we got a soul that we can hardly see, imperceptible to us, but because we got bodies too that are created by God, and will share in the final victory. The resurrection of the body is extremely crucial to all of this. So that's the second reason why we ought to respect people. Thirdly, this respect that comes our way comes to us as created male and female. Got an interesting combination of ideas here about the male-female question. Made for each other. Look at this. Not that God left the humans, the men or the women, half-made or incomplete. Part of what we see in our culture today, strong sentiment along that line that we're half-made or incomplete, can be only complete with the other. Well, I mean, that's tremendously strong strain in our culture. Only possible way to be happy is to be completed by the other of the opposite sex. Only possible way. Catechism denies that. Created us to be a communion of persons, helpmates, partners, and then a key word again. And complementary is masculine and feminine. Well, I don't know if some of you might have read my most recent reflections on this very topic, in which I took a shot at that complementarity model as playing into gender stereotypes. As I say, as soon as you say there are masculine characteristics and feminine characteristics, and we're going to bring them together somehow to make a happy combination, I think we lost the ball game already. I think as soon as we name certain characteristics as masculine and certain ones as feminine, then everybody's going to be trying to get into that mold or follow those stereotypes. There's no way around it, I think, in our culture. What I suggested is we get away from that complementarity idea and simply say that we got human beings relating to one another who are an interesting combination of the desire for independence and for intimacy. Where both things are at play, maybe in different quantities. But we know each other and can relate to each other as men and women because we both understand two things, both the drive for independence and the drive for intimacy. That's why we don't come as each other as aliens, but as potential partners. So we're dignified because we're male and female. God looked down on that last day when he created, every other day he looked down and said, I like those kangaroos I made, I like what I made. But when he looked at the males and female he made, the man and the woman, God said, this is very good, what I have made. Our dignity is rooted in that. This is very good, what I have made. And finally, because we human beings are called to friendship with God, with grace, Jesus made it clear, I don't call you servants, I call you friends, playing out this whole idea of what grace is about. Well, we find our contemporary ways of getting hold of that. So you see what the Catechism that somehow I'm not. You see, it plays into the whole idea of the need for affirmation. How do we maintain our own sense that I'm worthwhile, that I'm a good person, that I got something to offer? With the Catechism says the final answer to that really ends up coming because it's rooted in the sense that we are the friends of God. We had a wonderful talk today at my place by a black woman, a clinical psychologist. And she was talking about the things she has to go through in her life. And the slice, and she had to go to school with professors who didn't understand her, coming from a minority culture and all of that. And she said right out loud on the campus, University of Toledo, the only way she survived all of that was by believing that God called her and was close to her. She had a warrant, a basis, a grounding for seeing herself as dignified. And then we're looking at the next point here. He says, as he looks at his watch, the humans are threatened by sin and guilt. There's parts of the culture that won't let us talk about sin. We talk about neuroses. You can talk about social conditioning. You can't talk about sin. Psychotherapist Carl Menninger wrote a book, Whatever Became of Sin. He said because we don't talk about it, because the clergy won't talk about it, because we quit preaching about it, that therefore we are all impoverished. Therefore, we're all in danger of having vague guilt feelings, not knowing what to do with them. And there's an awful lot of things that you hear today coming out of Catholic circles that are almost afraid to mention the word sin. The Catechism does not let us do that. Catechism seriously and clearly reminds us that we are sinners, that sin is part of the world in which we live, and we have to deal with that. It says we got original sin. That broke the harmony that we had with the whole world. But the Catechism takes what I would think is a standard Catholic sense of this. It says not that we are utterly and totally depraved. That's John Calvin in the Institute, founder of the Reformed wing of the Protestant churches. Right in the beginning of the Institute, says human nature is essentially depraved. Catholic thought has never been that. The two words, I think, go together here. The Catechism says it. We're not totally corrupted. We're wounded. Goes on, that quote doesn't stop there, but that's a way of thinking of the Catholic Saints. We're not corrupted totally, but we're wounded. And because we're wounded, we are under this threat of sin and guilt. G.F. means Saints of Gaudium et Spes, the Pastoral Constitution. It's a great portrayal, it seems to me, of the struggle that we have. It talks about a combat with the powers of evil. Finding ourselves in the midst of a battlefield. The cross is part of life. Great cost. There's a cost to discipleship. It seems as though almost that something in the Catholic world has been lost. I must say, I was very interested in the Echoes of Faith videos that I saw. I saw 2 of them so far. I didn't see Bob Wilhelm. But all the snippets from them, interviewing all little people and bigger people and so on, and I heard nothing of the cross, nothing that sounds anything like number 3 here, of combat, of struggle. It was all warm, all comforting. I heard nothing of challenge. Anybody. There's one woman who said something like, well, I'd hate to be on the cross like Jesus was for 3 hours. I can't imagine doing that. But other than that, nothing. The cost of discipleship seems to have gotten lost in Catholic consciousness. It's quite amazing. Catechism is going to hammer away at this. Sitting on our island, we're not going to just be allowed to think that life is easy. And then, however, I think the last word goes to Romans 5, 5th chapter of Romans, where sin increased, where sin existed, grace more abounds. The great sense of the Catholic outlook on who we are. And then we get the great challenges in the culture to our faith, and that is the idea that somehow to be a Christian is dehumanizing. To be a Christian means that somehow we're in control, not alive, not with it, somehow living in a childish state. Those are the classic criticisms of the 19th and 20th century. I've listed these people who have given us this line of thought. Some of them we got Feuerbach, Marx, Nietzsche got misspelled, Freud, Sartre, Camus. All those people had one thing in common. They said that belief keeps us from being an adult, keeps us from growing and flourishing. It's dehumanizing. Marx says it's like an opiate. Drugs us on minds in heaven so we don't know anything about this world. Freud said it's an illusion. We project it, we make it up, thus keeping us in a childish state. So all these people had something in common. To believe in God is somehow keeps us childish. Catechism looks at it in a very different way. The Catechism fundamentally follows the thought of Pope John Paul II. One of the great strengths of our Pope's thought is his anthropology, his sense that the Christian message fulfills what we are all about. That to follow Christ makes us more alive, more with it. The Vatican Council said that. The people who believe in God should be more passionate about this world than anybody else. We ought to be the ones who are most involved in trying to change the world. Taking out our whole, what the religion is supposed to make us flourish. It's supposed to bring us happiness. We seek happiness. God calls us to beatitude. True happiness is found in God alone. Well, I would think that we could play that out at much greater length. But the crucial point is that the gospel accords with human nature. That Jesus is the most fulfilled person who ever lived. If you want to find the most mature person who walked around, we looked in the gospel. The most self-actualized. The person who made the most impact on people. The person who made the most difference in this world of ours. So anthropology is really Christology. You look at Christ and you see what we're supposed to be. So there's no room in the Catechism for wimps as Christians, for weak-kneed people, for milquetoast, for some sort of mellow approach to life. the call to flourish, the fullness of life. Christ came to give us life, to give it abundantly. And then there's the whole idea of human freedom. There's a lot of challenges to this. Two major challenges in our culture, as I'm saying here. One is that it's an illusion, that we're all determined. That's B.F. Skinner, a behaviorist, said that's how we're not really free. We're just determined by all these social things around us, or our psyches, or we got a whole lot of that now in dysfunctional language, dysfunctional families. I came from a dysfunctional family. That's why I'm such a creep and so hard to get along with. It's all their fault. So we got a whole lot of victimhood that says, well, I'm like this because my father was mean to me. Therefore, I'm justified in running around being mean to others. So that is a big cultural thing here. And the other thing is freedom is simply license, do whatever we want. And the Catechism, I think, gives us a pretty rich notion of freedom. I pick out the quotes that I like. By free will, we shape our own life. We have the possibility of taking hold, of determining where we're going. I like that human freedom is a force for growth and maturity and truth and goodness. The more one does what is good, the freer we become. What an odd notion of freedom, huh? Real freedom, it means we serve others. Freedom makes us responsible. When we sin, we really mess up our freedom, violate it. There's a quote from Galatians 5:1 and number 5. For freedom, Christ has set us free. So that would take a whole long explanation, I'm sure, of what freedom is all about. I would just say this: the Catechism I think, has a lot of good ideas on it, and makes it clear that freedom is our root capacity for shaping ourselves in conformity with Christ and in conformity with God's will for us. And then finally, we are interdependent creatures. Sitting on that island, we probably know that. I remember when I was studying in Oxford, all I ever did was study, except I played cricket once with Ted Yarnold, to my eternal embarrassment. American baseball player comes to Oxford and attempts to play cricket. Provided people would want to laugh anyway. Anyway, how did I get off on that? Oh, yeah. In Oxford, I remember doing studying, and I didn't do any ministerial work. I began to forget who I was. Began to forget I was a priest, because all I did was study. And I remember having to deal with that concept, remind myself of who I am, that and it became so clear to me that we know who we are because people keep feeding it back to us. We know who we are because people tell us who we are in 100 ways. By what they ask of us. Father, can I see you tonight? No one said that to me for 2 years. I forgot that. Our identity is social. We're interdependent creatures. It's very clear. And of course, we live in a culture that's forgotten this in large measure. We have individualism, going to do our own thing. We had the me decade. And this has not worked out very well. And the Catechism, of course, reminds us over and over that we are communal beings. We live in communities. We've got to be concerned about the common good, respect for other people's rights, to the development of the world. We have to be, I see Father Boff back there, he wants me to say, we've got to be missionary-minded. No, we can't be just worrying about ourselves. We have to think outwardly. We've got responsibilities to a larger community. We live in an abundant culture. We have to share with others. So sitting on our island, we could think we're alone, but in memory we would be able to bring back the relationships. That's how Viktor Frankl survived in the death camp, by memory and imagination of his wife. That he was a essentially related creature even when treated without any dignity, subjected to the worst kinds of situations, because he's essentially social. Well, that's my effort to say how the Catechism would help us. The question is, who am I? Who am I becoming? And while I would probably like to say it in a lot different ways, and why I would love to, it'd have to build on this and take what contemporary theologians have to say. It's valuable. If you're going to be there on the island, it's not a bad book to have. And we search the question, who are we? There are tremendous resources in it, and a lot of great quotes and stuff we can think on for about 6 months till we get a hold of that book, Practical Guide for Shipmaking. Thank you. What we're going to do is take a couple-minute break, and then we're going to see if people have questions, and we will end then no later than 6:45. I invite you next week. I'd ask Father Edward Yarnell to stand up, please. Oxford Don, an internationally known scholar. He will be here next week. He will be a lecture. So let's take a couple-minute stand-up break. Rebuttal. What is the rationale for excluding 20th century theologians? Well, I'm standing here. I just realized I promised someone I was going to tape this thing, and I didn't. It's taping? Thank goodness. I could just see myself decapitated. Thank you. What is the rationale for excluding 20th century theologians? I think that probably it would be, we have to see if they bear the test of time. The Catechism is not meant to be an avant-garde theological treatise. It's meant to summarize the tradition, to bring it together. I think that, you could argue that it doesn't make sense to have those people. I mean, total exclusion I'm not sure makes sense, but I mean, you can see a catechism is bound to be conservative. It has to be, because it's trying to pull together the long tradition and hold it that way. So I believe that's fundamentally the reason for it. Right. Very good point. I repeat your point, everyone here, that Danny just made a very important point, and that is that through the quoting of the council documents, a lot of the ideas of the contemporary theologians get into the book. And that's probably especially true in all the many, many quotes from Gaudium et Spes, that is the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, the longest document from the council, and one of the most significant. I think that is not accidental, by the way, because Pope John Paul II was on the commission that produced Gaudium et Spes and was very influential in it, and his anthropology is very clear in that, and it comes through in the book. There is what we would call in the book a great Christian personalism. The Pope did his dissertation on a 20th century thinker, Edmund Husserl, in a book called The Acting Person. And it is extremely contemporary in its understanding of human existence. It is a great understanding that we are in process, that we are shaping our existence, that freedom is the capacity to make ourselves what we will be, capacity to move towards God actively. There's a great, powerful sense of that, what we would call Christian personalism in the Catechism. And I think that you can see the hand of the Pope in that clearly. And, of course, you see it in Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution as well. And I think it's one of the great strengths of the Catechism. Yes? The question is asked about the third part of the Catechism, which is on the Christian life, and the relationship between the Beatitudes that we would associate with the Gospel and the Ten Commandments that we associate with the Hebrew Scriptures. It's a very interesting interplay. The section begins with talking about the Beatitudes. The moral section begins with the Beatitudes, our search for happiness. In fact, a number of the quotes that I took out are from that section on the human person, seeking God, and so on. And it makes the statement that the Beatitudes, reflect for us the life of Christ himself and what we are called to as disciples. That's explicitly said in there. But then it goes on to structure the section according to the commandments. That becomes the Ten Commandments. That becomes the dominant part of it. There is great criticism of this part for that reason by many theologians. They feel that the whole idea of the Beatitudes and the call to the richer, more generous Christian life got lost in between, that they didn't find a way to integrate the two. Now, you understand that the Ten Commandments would be a natural law statement. In other words, you got the commandments that Israel had in other cultures as well, that we don't associate with the official revelation. So figuring out that thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not kill is something we find in religions generally, and even among secular humanists. That's natural law kind of thinking, which is characteristically Catholic. Very often Protestant ethics does not have the same room for philosophy, for natural law kind of thinking that grounds morality in our perceptions of the patterns of human existence. That Protestant morality is more centered on the revelation in Christ. So in one sense, that third section is got a characteristically Catholic bent to it. But what the scholars would say who look at this would say you don't get an integration of the two. You don't see how the Christian is supposed to follow the Beatitudes, be meek and humble and single-minded in the pursuit of justice and peace and so on. How all that relates to the material in the Catechism seems to be what is lacking, not put together. And many people would fear, therefore, that that section would be used to go back to a minimalism. Now, I'm not sure that's a justified criticism, but that is what some people say. It'll take us back to a legalism, which we spent all kind of time trying to get around, and to move to a more generous ethic where we didn't say, well, how far can we go before it's a sin, but we said, how can we generously respond to the call of Christ to be a disciple? I'd say more criticism of the third section than about any other one. You buy that, Ted, or not? More criticism of the third section than most of the others? No. When you take the fourth section, you get more laudatory statements than any of the others. There's a lot of feeling that the fourth section on the Our Father has a wonderful beginning section on prayer, and then looks at the petitions of the Our Father, that is really rich, and many people could read that. So if you're on the island, you might, for spiritual reading, you got a nice fourth section. You know, you can do your 15 minutes of spiritual reading in the morning, afternoon, and evening. Yes. Please. Thank you, and Father Arnold has a very good memory. Ed? Yes. Did I get that last line right, Ed? Do you want to say that once more? Say it out loud again. Yes. But say the last line. Some people are in here. Catechism. Yes. Sinking ship, yeah. And that grows out of Ed's inner ambivalence. about my lecture. I'll go back. I'm buying in, I think, to Archbishop Weakland's statement that this is a valuable resource. I think it's true. I mean, you can find Irenaeus' quote in here on human beings and the glory of God, human beings being fully alive and so on. That's great. You can find a lot of things in here. I mean, of course, if I'm teaching a class, I'm going to use it exactly like I used it tonight. That is, I selectively took quotes out of it. All quotes that fit my own sense of where you ought to go. I got all the favorable quotes that I like. I could take out 100 other quotes that just don't feel right to me and isn't the way I would say it. So I'm not going to say the Catechism does not strike me as being the lifesaver. It strikes me as something that exists, and you've got to know what to do with it. Those of us who would buy into more contemporary expressions of the Christian faith have to know what to do with this book. Now, one is to burn it. One is to be mad about it because it talks about men and not men and women. That's another alternative. Another alternative is to teach it, to take it and use it like in a classroom, and to follow the format in here. Take out the in brief. At the end of every section there's an in brief. Almost everyone's got it, so you know that. But and to use that and structure a class around it. I would reject all those. My own thing is it exists. Now, what are we going to do with it? So the question is, are we going to have this lecture series or not? Ted Yarnell and I sat at Morris Inn at the University of Notre Dame and discussed this. Are we going to what will be the topic of the series? Can you salvage it? Is it usable? Is there a way to do it? And what I tried to model tonight is a way of doing that is one, correlational. So my first thing is always, what's the challenge in the culture and how you put it together? So how can you be correlational? That's the first thing. How can you use it the way they say you're supposed to use it, as a resource, not as a textbook? So I use it as a resource by looking through and finding quotes that seem to buttress my own sense of a theological anthropology today. That's honestly exactly what I did. I picked out the quotes that I liked, that furthered my aim. And it tells you in the front you're supposed to do that. As a catechist, you're supposed to do that. And the other thing that I would do then is try to supplement it with Bernard Herring on freedom and Hans Kung on Does God Exist, and Rahner on freedom and so on. So that's my thing. So I don't see it. I don't think that's what the headline's going to read. I think it's going to read "Strike Settled." Line up in order. Heavy hitters to come. Yes. I asked some important people that very question and was told there's no plans to do that. It calls for that in the beginning. I talked to somebody who knows a lot and asked that very question and was told that they knew of no plans to do that. I think that, in my own mind, I have a plan. I want to write my catechism and take my sort of Exploring the Faith series and take all of that material I've developed over many years sequentially, anthropology and God and grace and revelation and Christology and so on, and write that now and do exactly what I just did here. and that is use quotes from the Catechism to buttress the line of thought that goes with that. And I'm sure there's others sitting around right now thinking of doing the same thing. So I want to write a catechism for collegians that incorporates this material. But does it organically. And by organically, I mean where one thing flows from the other. Well, if you don't treat it seems to me you can't treat the church before you've treated Christology. And it has to somehow flow one thing from another. I think that's what doesn't happen when you got four pillars or four movements or a symphony, as the Pope likes to make the metaphor. I don't think you can do it that way. Oh, let's not stop yet. Have a question. I'm on a roll. Let's go. Yes. Yes. Question is asked about conscience. It's put in a social framework of, and I think probably the most telling way of saying it, can one sort of be personally against abortion and then not work for public policy that corresponds with that, or accept public policy that is opposed to it? It's a way of sharpening it, maybe. Well, I would say when you look at conscience, there's really a couple of different meanings of conscience in the book. The one taken from Gaudium et Spes is that the conscience is the deepest sanctuary, that inner part of ourselves where we listen to God. Very, it's got a very private sense in one way. The other meaning of conscience that comes in is much more, I guess, from St. Alphonsus and others. I think he's quoted in that section. That is, that conscience is sort of the practical judgment I make about what ought to be done in any given situation. Now, I think the way I would incorporate what you said is to put both those things in a communal context, not by saying there's some sort of collective conscience, or that it would correspond to some sort of collective guilt. I think that's probably not the way to go with this, but to say that when I listen to that God in my own heart, I am part of the human condition. There's other people listening in the sanctity of their own heart to the same call from God. And there's a certain commonality that comes out of that. That's why both of us listening end up saying, I ought to respect people, or I ought to do good and avoid evil. So I think that's where the communal notion comes in, that in this quiet heart, in that secret sanctuary, where we feel called good and to avoid evil, that we recognize one another. We can be together on that. We can make common with people, not sure, who aren't even religious, because of agreement on that. The way I would say is, we're going to talk about ethical judgment. What ought to be done, what is clear, and as Brian brings it out and is linked with my last part of my talk, is we make judgments realizing that we live in social context, that we are institutional creatures, that we live in communities. we can't sit there and make decisions like we're the only ones. Like I tell the young people, the decision whether you're going to live with somebody who you're not married to is not just a private decision. You know, it might give your mother a heart attack. You know, it might violate your relationship with the community as a whole. Or it might bring a child into the world that you're not ready to support. And therefore that child's on welfare. So as soon as we make practical judgment about what we do in any individual case, got to bring in emotional consequences. I would not do it through a collective conscience, which sounds Jung's collective unconscious in a way. I wouldn't do that. I would say that all of our practical judgments have to take into account institute-social factors. Just an example that I suggest. Yes. That's a great question. The question is, why is the Catechism popular? Well, I addressed it somewhat in one of my reflections articles when I asked myself, why is the Pope's book popular? Threshold, Crossing the Threshold. Why is that popular? I have a feeling that there's a linkage on the question. This is the Pope's book. He picked Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, to be head of the commission and so on and so on. But, his stamp is all over this. It's his book. And I think it's at least possible that even people who don't read it or look at it associate it with that same mentality. We live in a relativistic culture. I want to hear a clear voice. We live in a culture where there's all kind of gray areas. I want to know what's right. You know, all this stuff of different theologies and pluralism, I want to know what the truth is. So my guess is that is the association that makes it popular. It's that desire for something clear and definite, and that's what the Catechism represents. Of course, most people in this audience think of Catechism, they think of Baltimore Catechism, which has clear answers to specific questions. And I suspect the same assumption is that you're going to find that here. And often, not in question and answer form, but that's what you find here. So I believe the popularity of much of that is connected with the Pope. The Pope is, when they look back on this history, it's going to be such an interesting study to see his tremendous popularity and why that is. I link it largely to this idea of the relativistic culture. And so many people are sick of it. They're sick and tired of the wishy-washy character of things. You know, it fits in with the whole desire to have capital punishment, for example. Strangely enough, the Pope's exactly the opposite side of that question. But I think it's the same psychological dynamic that says, we've got to have this thing ordered and clear. My father was big on this. My father knew why this would be popular. He said after Second Vatican Council and all this stuff's going on, when are you going to put the lid on it? He found the lid. Some people want to use it. They want to put the lid on it. And of course, my whole presentation, my whole sense of it is that, no, what we ought to use it is the way it says it ought to be used as a resource. It doesn't close off the base on any of these questions. In fact, it opens them up. Brother Arnold contributed to a book edited by Walsh, first name, Michael Walsh, and which the authors use it in some cases as a springboard for very careful reasoning and theological work on how the stuff fits together. I mean, a lot of it, these guys use it as a way of thinking about the faith, which is what we have to do. So if we're on that island, it seems to me what happens is we use the book as somehow a catalyst for our thinking. And that's what I would hope the way it would be used. But it is an immense phenomenon to say that many copies are sold around the world, that many copies of the Pope's book, bestseller and all that. That's got to speak to something. I think it's a residual thing. It's not explicit like, oh, good, I got this on my shelf now I know the answer to 43 questions. I suspect many people who bought it will never read much of it. But I got it. You know what I mean? It's like a security blanket in a way. I think it's time to leave. And thank you. I hope everybody comes back next week for Father Yarnell's talk and brings a friend when you come. Thank you.